Hi everyone, I hope you had a good midterm. So I'm making this video instead of class this Thursday, October 4th, and I'm going to go over our assignment and the first part of the assignment, which is a literature review, and I'll be going over these in detail. And so here's a little bit of an agenda of what I'm going to talk about in this video. So I'll talk about the assignment itself, and then specifically this part, the literature review, then the topic that we're going to do our literature review on, which is mobile EEG. Then I'll show you an example paper that's on eClass of a friend of mine that we're going to read together. We're going to use that as a starting point to find other papers and also talk about how to read a scientific paper. And then your assignment is to create a list of 10 papers in APA format that discuss mobile EEG, and then to write a paragraph about each one. And so we'll talk about that, how to summarize a paper in a paragraph. Okay, so we'll start with the assignment. So on eClass, there's a bunch of the material that you'll need for the assignment. You can see, for instance, in our syllabus that the assignment is worth 40% of our overall grade in the class. And there's also late grades for late assignments, so you'll lose 10% for every week that you don't hand in an assignment. You can read more about the info here. So you'll see that on October 4th, we have this day to do the literature review. You can watch this video and you can start looking for papers. And then we have another 4 weeks of lectures and then the midterm, and then we begin in earnest our assignment. And November 8th, that day after the midterm, is when this part of the assignment is due. The literature review is due on November 8th. Within eClass, you can click on the assignment folder. So I'll show you where that is. You can click on the assignment folder here, which brings you to this Dropbox folder. And in there, we'll have folders for each part of the assignment that will specify maybe some resources or some data that we collected. So here's the first folder here. I'm going to be keeping people's participation grades right here. So remember that you get graded on your presence in class for these sections, and so please come to all these red periods in the syllabus here. And then if you click on this document, the lab project info, there's even more details about our group assignment. And so remember that this is group optional. You can, but you don't have to, join with 1, 2, or 3 other people, and you can do all the parts of the assignment as a team. You can hand in this literature review as a team, you can write your methods together, you can create your results, and you can hand in your final paper as a team. And you'll specify your group when you go to hand in the assignment. And you can also do these by yourself. When we get together to collect data on November 20th and 22nd, we're going to get into groups as well, and these are going to be separate from the groups that you're working on the paper on. You may or may not be in the same group, but that won't matter, because we're going to pool all of our data. So again, here you can see the different dates that we're going to be in the lab for this experiment as a group. And so here's the first one. This Thursday is the literature review. And then all these times after the midterm. These also specify in italics what's due that day. You can see how the grading is distributed. So remember that this is worth 40% of your grade in the course. 20% of that is participation. 10% of that is the literature review hand-in, the methods hand-in, the results hand-in, and then the final paper is worth 50% of your final grade. Of this 40%. And these sections that are all worth 10% are all generally pass-fail. So if you just hand in pretty much anything, that you'll receive the 10%. We want to keep everyone on track instead of grade how well people are at writing a paragraph. We want everyone to take part in these assignments. So these are going to be pass-fail, but we're going to give you feedback about how you did. So I would take advantage of these opportunities if I were you to do your best job so that you can get feedback and improve those sections before the final paper is due. Okay, so for the rest of, and here you can also see the layout of the rubric for the final paper, so you can see what's going to be important. This first assignment is just a literature review. Is this 10%? So by the start of class, submit on eClass an APA reference list with a paragraph for each paper describing the hypothesis, methods, results of interest. So we're going to use 10 papers for each group or person. On eClass, you'll be able to submit those assignments. So here on eClass, you can click on this Literature Review Submit button, and you'll be able to submit the assignment here. And notice that there's a specific way of naming the assignment that will allow us to see who's in your group. Or if it's just yourself, then you would name it with just your one name. And so this consistency of naming is an important thing. So let's go back to the outline for today. And so we've talked about the assignment and we've talked generally about the literature review assignment. So let's talk about this topic of mobile EEG. So as we've talked about in class, EEG is becoming increasingly mobile and affordable. And so instead of a $30,000 or a $60,000 system that sits on your desk, you can purchase quite a cheap system at Best Buy or from one of these other manufacturers that can sit on your head and allow you to interact with maybe your iPhone app, or can be giving you feedback about your sleep, for instance, or some of the products that are available. And so because of this brand new availability of these products, there's a lot of new research coming out. Because it's very cheap to run these studies now, you can grab a bunch of volunteers and stick on one of these $300 EEG systems and do pretty much anything. And one of the issues with this is that the first thing people do is put on one of these devices and then do some crazy activity like skydiving or swimming or jumping up and down on a trampoline. And a lot of the data, therefore, isn't very grounded in previous neuroscience research. They're not trying to replicate previous studies that people have done, but also a lot of the effects that they're measuring are going to, I would say, be a lot due to movement of the body. So artifacts that aren't actually from brain activity of people moving in these situations. So when you make EEG mobile, you introduce a new problem that when we move our muscles, we create artifacts in the EEG. And so we're going to talk about mobile EEG, and we're going to do this group assignment together, looking at the literature on mobile EEG so far and what people have done. We can look at some of the papers from my lab, and we'll look at some of the papers from some of my colleagues' labs that are doing these mobile EEG studies. So there's all sorts of different technologies available, so there's lots of great papers to read about this. So let's start to think about how we would find some papers. So I've let you start with this paper here. So the date's wrong, but there's a paper you can get to by clicking on this link, which is written by a friend of mine, Olav Krigelson, who's a professor at the University of Victoria. And Olav and his team of researchers here have taken one of these portable EEG systems. Specifically, they've taken the Muse EEG system, which we saw in class, and they've tested it in comparison to existing expensive EEG systems in the same type of experiments that would be done in the lab normally. So we're going to talk, after we talk about how to find papers more generally, we're going to talk specifically about this paper, and we're going to go through and look through the figures and results and think about what Olav did with his team and how we can expand off these findings. He's showing that people can, you can measure quite good ERPs using one of these cheap EEG systems. So we'll see how he showed that, and we'll see how you go about reading a paper like this. And then how we can find new papers based off this paper. So let me just go to the outline and make sure we're on track. Right, so our topic is going to be about mobile EEG. So all of the papers that you find and that you include in your literature review should be under this topic of EEG and more mobile or affordable situations like a classroom or a movie theater. Anything you can find in that regard, and there's going to be too many. There's going to be more than 10, and so your job will also be to sift through that big plethora of studies and try to find what interests you. Don't try to find what interests me, try to find what you'd be interested in writing about. Okay, so we just looked briefly at this Olaf Krigelson paper, and we'll come back to that in a second. So I'm going to start the second video so that we don't get cut off at 15 minutes of this video. So tune into the second video, and I'll show you how to use a paper to start finding other papers in a research area.